History repeats itself. A very popular proverb. Does it make any sense at all? Is history going in an infinite loop? And can we, by understanding our past, predict our future? Could we avoid major crises like they occurred before? Or should we look to the future and never let the past haunt us? Historic recurrence, the repetition of events, is far from a new idea. Let's go back in time. The Greek historian Polybius first introduced this idea in a historical context rather than in a scientific one. Since Thales, Greek scientists and philosophers had been fascinated by the cycle of generation, change, and decay. Polybius translates this idea in his famous Cycle of Governments. He states that when individuals form a community, they will automatically give power to a single leader. When the leader acts in the interest of his people, this system works out just fine. Over time, however, most powerful people will lose the right track and turn their monarchy into its negative counterpart, a tyranny. Upper classes will rise up and take power, installing an aristocracy, eventually to be corrupted into a selfish oligarchy. The people on their turn will lead the system toward a democracy. Democracies in crisis easily descend into, watch out, here comes another one, ochlocracies, a state in which the power is in the hands of uncontrollable masses. This situation goes along with chaos and violence, making way for autocratic leaders rising to power once again. A pretty depressing thought, isn't it? Well, let us pick an example close to the First World War. After World War I, the German Empire collapsed and a republic was proclaimed. Peace would be disturbed by the Great Depression of 1929. Unlike most other democracies, the Germans had never known the long process of democratization, and this inexperience led to some decisions that would turn out to be fatal for the young democracy. In a most desperate attempt to settle the crisis, the German president von Hindenburg gave almost dictatorial powers to a succession of politicians, the fourth one being Adolf Hitler. The rest, as we all know, is history. This example illustrates just perfectly how history sometimes just runs in circles until a good balance is achieved. Yet we all know very well how a seemingly peaceful situation easily gets disturbed. Is history always a good teacher? Well, probably not. Some events are driven by a bad understanding of history or by only looking at how things went before without considering present situations. The First World War, for example, was started for no good reason. The conflict between Austria on one side and Serbia on the other had no direct influence on the rest of Europe at all. Yet, forced in by a whole series of historical duties and alliances, the entire continent got itself into a war that had nothing to do with its original trigger. To find out how important history is for our future, and to find out if it repeats itself, we maybe should try and figure out where it ends. When is a certain part of history done? When did the First World War end? In 1918, when the war itself ended? Maybe in 1945, when the Second World War, a direct result of the first one, ended. Maybe even in 1989, when the Soviet Empire collapsed, a direct product of the First World War. Or maybe even in 1999, when almost 100 years after the Balkan region had ignited the conflict that would shape the upcoming century, the last shots in the Kosovo War fell. You see, we can't even agree on when history is done. Does history repeat itself? Who knows? Sometimes things seem to happen over and over and over again. Other times, coincidence and unexpected twists change the course of events. That doesn't seem to be a single fixed answer. I will leave you with this quote from George Hegel. What experience and history teach us is this: people and governments have never learned anything from history or acted on principles deduced from it. Thank you.
Can I be optimistic about our future then?
Yeah, of course you can. I said that sometimes history repeats itself, sometimes it doesn't. It depends on what we learn from history and if we keep it in mind. George Hegel says that in many, many situations people have misunderstood history or not minded it, but if we care to understand it, if we care to learn from it, we should be fine.
Are you for or against democracy?
I'm for democracy as long as it's kept in check. And by that I don't mean I want some kind of dictature, but there has to be some kind of stable organization. Because some democracies that were too direct and too uncontrolled completely failed. Like, for example, the very first democracy in this world, the Athenian democracy, it failed because everyone could just take part in the decision making of the state. So no one could agree on anything. So, like Polybius says, the best state form is a mix of all these different things. There has to be one leader who controls everything, but he has to be chosen by the people and supported by the people, and there has to be a parliament, which is in fact a small group that is ruling in our name because we choose them. So it's a system that is constructed very carefully, not to give one person absolute power, but also not to spread the power over everyone, not someone control it at all.
So China is a good kind of democracy?
No, because in China, only a small part of people can take part in the decision making. I am a fan of democracy. I think democracy is the only good way to rule. But I want to say that the democracy in which everyone can take part in the decision making at any given moment, it just goes wrong. In China, only people who belong to the party can stem, and they can only vote for one candidate, so they don't really have an option.
So you stress that we need to try to understand history as accurately as possible. Is it possible to fully understand those crucial events in history without knowing everything involved?
Well, the personal opinions of many of the main characters of history play an important role. Certain pretty insignificant happenings had an immense influence on history. So we can't understand everything, but we should try to understand the main flow of thoughts that was going around most people. Like when you see the important events of nationalism, what happened, what did people think they would achieve with communism, and all those different opinions, we should all study them and see what's good, what's bad.
You suggested that World War I is still going on. What are we experiencing today?
Well, today we are experiencing the European Union, which is fantastic. And the European Union is a result of the First World War, from the fear that we should never let anything like the First World War happen ever again. So, but the main results of the First World War still going on, which are slowly evaporating that war, are not situated here where we live. We live in peace for, what is it, 70 years now. So in our regions, the war has ended. But in the Middle East, for example, the wars with oil in Africa, the wars with the colonial empires with borders decided after the First World War, they are still going on, those conflicts.
Okay, thank you, Mr. De Ridder.